The storm had trapped hundreds inside Chicago International Airport, and the air reeked of rain and exhaustion. Overhead speakers screamed flight delays, babies wailed, and people argued at crowded gates. Among the chaos stood Ethan Miller, a 34-year-old single father whose face carried the kind of tired that doesn't fade with sleep. His grease-stained hands, proof of years spent fixing engines, tightened around a worn boarding pass that might as well have been a prayer, strapped to his chest. His baby son Liam stirred weakly, 11 months old, fever burning through him since last night. The boy's small head rested on Ethan's shirt, damp with sweat. Ethan could feel the heat, could feel his child's heartbeat flutter against his own. He'd already missed 2 standby flights. Each cancellation felt like another door slammed by fate. They were supposed to be home in Seattle by now. Home, where the crib waited, where silence would finally mean peace, not grief. The funeral had ended 2 days ago, but Ethan's father's last words still echoed in his mind. Take care of the boy. Now, with the terminal lights flickering above and the storm clawing at the glass outside, Ethan whispered under his breath, "Please, just one seat." He didn't care about comfort. He didn't care about food or sleep. All he wanted was to hold his son in a quiet seat on a plane heading west. People pushed past him. An argument broke out at the counter. A baby screamed somewhere else. But for Ethan, the world narrowed to the weight in his arms and the fragile hope that maybe, somehow, someone would call his name. And when the loudspeaker finally crackled, "Passenger Miller, please approach gate B14." His heart nearly stopped. The terminal was a storm of voices and desperation when it happened. Ethan Miller was standing at the counter, one hand holding his crumpled boarding pass, the other supporting his sleeping son against his chest. The baby's forehead was still too warm. His body felt heavier than usual, as if the fever had stolen his tiny strength. Ethan had stopped checking the clock. Time had lost meaning. There were only canceled flights, restless passengers, and the dull ache behind his eyes. He had already accepted the possibility that they might spend the night on the cold airport floor when the announcement came. The airline attendant lifted her eyes from the computer, her tone cautious but clear. "Mr. Miller, we have 1 seat left." For a heartbeat, Ethan didn't move. He thought he had misheard her, a cruel echo from his own imagination. "1 seat," he repeated softly. "Yes, sir, 1 seat to Seattle." It just opened, his chest tightened. 1 seat. Just one, for him, not for them. He looked down at Liam, his son's flushed face pressed against his gray t-shirt, little fingers clutching the fabric like it was the only thing keeping him safe. Ethan swallowed hard. The attendant must have seen the hesitation in his eyes. "You can hold him on your lap," she said gently. "It's allowed for infants." That simple kindness cracked something open inside him. The wall he'd built to stay calm began to crumble. Ethan's voice shook when he whispered, "Thank you." 2 words, barely audible, but they carried the weight of exhaustion, grief, and relief. She smiled softly, handing him the boarding pass like it was a lifeline. "Gate B14. You should hurry." He nodded, clutching the ticket as if it might disappear. The moment he turned away from the counter, the chaos of the terminal faded into the background. The announcements, the shouting, the crying, it all melted into a single, distant hum. For the first time in hours, Ethan felt something close to hope. He moved quickly through the crowd, his boots heavy on the polished floor, every step echoing in his chest. The baby shifted, whimpering softly. Ethan murmured, "It's okay, buddy. We're going home. Daddy's got you." But even as he said it, part of him feared it wasn't true. What if the flight got canceled again? What if Liam's fever got worse mid-air? What if... No, he shook off the thoughts. He couldn't afford fear anymore. Not tonight. When he reached the gate, the flight attendant was already waiting, scanning the last few passengers. "Mr. Miller," she called. He raised his hand. "Right here," she smiled, taking his ticket. "You're our last seat. You can board now." The phrase hit him like sunlight after a storm. Our last seat. The words felt miraculous. He stepped toward the boarding tunnel, the carpet soft beneath his boots. His arms tightened around Liam, who stirred and gave a weak, sleepy sigh. "Almost there, little man," Ethan whispered. "Almost home." Inside the tunnel, the air smelled of metal and jet fuel, sharp and familiar. Every step forward was a victory over the weight pressing down on his heart. He had buried his father only 3 days ago, He hadn't even processed the loss. He had stood beside the grave holding Liam, promising to raise him with the same quiet strength his father once carried. Now, with the baby against his chest and tears welling in his eyes, that promise felt like the only thing keeping him upright. As he reached the cabin door, the flight attendant inside greeted him with the kind of tired kindness that comes from long shifts. "Welcome aboard," she said, then glanced at the baby. "He's beautiful." Ethan managed a small, trembling smile. "Thank you. He's had a rough night." 28B, she said, handing him the stub, all the way in the back. Ethan nodded and stepped into the narrow aisle. The cabin was already full. He brushed against elbows, whispered apologies, adjusted the diaper bag on his shoulder. People glanced at him, some with sympathy, others with the weary indifference of seasoned travelers. None of it mattered. What mattered was that he had a seat, that they were going home, that for the first time in days, the horizon looked possible again. He sank into the narrow seat, cradling Liam close as the engines rumbled to life. His eyes stung, but this time, the tears weren't from pain. They were from gratitude, from the simple, fragile miracle of being seen, being helped, being given one more chance to move forward. And as the plane began to taxi toward the runway, Ethan closed his eyes, whispered a quiet prayer of thanks, and kissed the top of his son's head. Just one seat, he thought, but it's enough. Ethan shuffled down the narrow aisle, careful not to bump the sleeping child pressed against his chest. The air inside the cabin felt stale and crowded, heavy with the mix of perfume, sweat, and impatience. The flight attendant guided him with a sympathetic smile. 28 Bravo. "Fees, sir." All the way in the back. He nodded, whispering a quiet thank you that barely carried over the noise of boarding passengers. Liam whimpered, his fevered body twisting slightly. Ethan began to hum the lullaby his father once sang to him, the melody soft and fragile under the drone of the engines warming up. "Almost there, little man," he whispered. "Almost home." As he moved past the rows, passengers avoided his gaze. Some smiled politely, others sighed, shifting their legs to make room. He didn't blame them. No one wanted to sit near a crying baby. He just needed a seat, just a few hours of sky between this chaos and home. Then, as he neared the back of the plane, something unexpected happened. A voice, calm yet commanding, rose from the front of first class. "Excuse me." The word carried through the cabin like a ripple. The flight attendant stopped mid-step. Ethan looked up. A woman stood from her plush seat near the window. Her presence drew quiet attention from those nearby. She looked to be in her mid-30s, tall, elegant, with shoulder-length honey blonde hair and a confidence that came from a life of being listened to. Her outfit was simple yet precise. A cream blouse tucked into tailored navy trousers, gold bracelet glinting under the cabin light. She pointed gently toward Ethan. "That man, he's traveling with an infant, isn't he?" The attendant hesitated. "Yes, ma'am, but he's seated in economy." The woman's expression softened, though her voice remained firm. "Then please, bring him here." Ethan froze. He wasn't sure he had heard her right. The people around him turned their heads. The sudden silence almost surreal. Even the hum of the air vents seemed to pause. "I beg your pardon," the attendant asked carefully. The woman smiled faintly. A mix of grace and quiet insistence. "I said, give him my seat. I'd like him and his child to sit here." For a second, no one moved. Ethan's mind raced. He looked down at his wrinkled jeans, the oil stains on his sleeves, the baby drooling faintly on his shirt. This had to be a mistake. People didn't do things like this. Not for strangers. He shook his head quickly. Ma'am, that's very kind, but I can't take your seat. You paid for it." The woman met his eyes. Her voice lowered, but it carried an undeniable warmth. "Yes, I did, but I remember what it's like to be you." The attendant blinked, unsure how to respond. The businessman in the next seat looked up from his laptop. A teenage girl 2 rows back stopped her music to watch. Something was happening. Something rare. Ethan felt his throat tighten. "I don't even know your name." "Grace," she said simply. "Grace Turner." He swallowed. "Grace, I can't. You can," she interrupted gently. "Because someone once did the same for me." For a moment, the world felt still. Ethan looked down at Liam, whose fevered face rested against his chest. Tiny chest rising and falling in exhausted rhythm. His son deserved comfort. He deserved peace. Grace turned to the flight attendant. "Please, Help him settle in. I'll take his seat in the back." Her tone left no room for argument. The attendant finally nodded, her voice soft with awe. "Of course, ma'am." As Grace gathered her purse and coat, the cabin seemed to exhale. The businessman leaned back, murmuring unbelievable. The teenage girl smiled faintly. A few passengers even clapped quietly, unsure what else to do. Ethan could barely breathe. I don't know what to say." Grace gave him a small, knowing smile. "You don't have to say anything. Just take care of your boy. That's enough." Their eyes met for a brief second that felt like an entire conversation. Gratitude, surprise, humility, all tangled into something wordless. As Grace walked down the aisle toward economy, Ethan sank into the plush first-class seat she had given up. The cushions felt impossibly soft under his trembling hands. He adjusted Liam in his lap, brushing the child's hair from his forehead. The engines began to roar, the cabin lights dimming as the plane prepared for takeoff. Ethan turned his head, trying to spot the woman again, but she had already disappeared among the rows. He closed his eyes, whispering, "Thank you." Grace, somewhere behind him, unseen but unforgettable. The woman who had just changed his night and maybe his life sat quietly in the back of the plane, content with her decision. Ethan's mind went blank. He could hear the words, could see her lips moving, but part of him refused to believe it. A stranger was offering him a first-class seat. That didn't happen in real life. That was something you saw in movies, the kind that made people cry and promise to be better, only to forget by morning. I can't take it," he stammered, his voice cracking under the weight of disbelief. "You paid for that seat." The woman didn't waver. She looked right at him, her eyes calm, warm, and certain. "My name is Grace Turner," she said softly, like she was introducing herself in church. "Years ago, when my daughter was 2, a man gave me his seat so I could feed her in peace. I never forgot what that felt like." Her words landed deep. Ethan felt the world shrink to just the two of them. The chatter around them blurred, the passengers frozen mid-motion. Even the baby, little Liam, seemed to still as if sensing something sacred was happening. Grace turned to the flight attendant. "Can we make that change?" The attendant hesitated, glancing at her ticket, then at Grace's expression, which left no room for argument. Finally, she nodded. "Yes, ma'am, we can do that. Thank you," Grace said, already gathering her coat and bag. Ethan stood frozen, clutching Liam, unsure what to do with his hands, his voice, or his emotions. "Ma'am, please, I don't deserve this." Grace gave a small, tired smile that held both strength and tenderness. "No one earns kindness. Mr. Miller, that's the beauty of it." The flight attendant motioned toward the open seat. "Go ahead." "Aye, sir." Ethan hesitated, still half in disbelief, but Grace stepped aside, holding out her hand toward the seat like she was opening a door to something far bigger than comfort. With slow, almost reverent steps, he moved forward, his legs trembling, as he sank into the wide leather seat. It felt like his body couldn't comprehend the softness. His fingers brushed the armrest. For a man who had spent his life working with metal and oil and noise, this was surreal. He looked up at Grace, still standing a few rows ahead. Their eyes met one last time. "I don't know how to thank you," he said quietly. Grace tilted her head, her voice gentle but firm. "By passing it on someday." It wasn't just a suggestion. It was a command wrapped in grace, a seed planted in his heart. Ethan nodded slowly, his throat thick with emotion. "I will," he promised. Grace smiled, gave a small nod, and turned to walk toward the back of the plane. People parted to let her through. A few whispered things like, "That's amazing," or "Can you believe that?" But she didn't acknowledge them. Her stride was calm, graceful, humble. When she disappeared behind the curtain dividing first class from the rest of the plane, something shifted in the air. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, peaceful, the kind of silence that comes after a prayer. Ethan adjusted Liam on his lap, the child's head resting perfectly against his chest. He could still smell the faint sweetness of baby lotion mixed with the sterile air of the cabin. He reached up, wiped his eyes quickly before anyone could notice. Across from him, a businessman lowered his laptop, clearly shaken by what he had witnessed. A college student near the aisle had taken out her earbuds, staring quietly at the empty seat Grace had left behind. Even the flight attendant's voice softened as she spoke to passengers now, her tone touched by the moment. Kindness had rippled through the cabin like an invisible wave. Ethan leaned back, letting out a shaky breath. He looked down at his son and whispered, "Someone just gave us a miracle." Buddy." Liam stirred, opened his eyes for a brief second, and gave a small, sleepy smile. Ethan felt emotions deeply, recognizing that kindness perpetuates itself, especially in uncertain moments. When the wheels hit the ground in Seattle, Ethan felt the soft jolt run through his body like a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The storm had cleared. The clouds outside glowed orange in the late evening sun, and for the first time in days, he felt peace. The plane slowed, passengers unbuckled, and the usual chaos returned, phones buzzing, bags unzipped, impatient sighs filling the cabin. But Ethan didn't move. He sat still, holding Liam close as if moving might break the spell that Grace Turner had left behind. He turned, looking toward the back of the plane where she had gone. The curtain separating first class from economy had been pulled back, passengers spilling into the aisle. He craned his neck, scanning faces, hoping to catch even a glimpse of her. Nothing. She was gone. He stayed in his seat until most passengers had left, earning a polite but expectant glance from the flight attendant. "Sir," she said softly, "you can disembark now." Ethan nodded slowly, adjusting Liam in his arms. "That woman, the one who gave me her seat, did you see where she went?" The attendant shook her head. "She was one of the first to leave. I didn't get her number. Sorry. That was it. No trace. No name beyond Grace Turner. No way to thank her. She had simply vanished into the crowd like a warm memory fading into the noise of reality." He walked through the jet bridge, the familiar smell of the terminal washing over him. People hurried past, dragging suitcases, greeting loved ones. But Ethan walked slowly, each step heavy with the strange ache of gratitude and longing. He wanted to see her face one more time. He wanted to say the words properly. "Thank you for reminding me that good people still exist." Outside, the Seattle air was cool and damp. He strapped Liam back into his carrier, kissed his tiny forehead, and whispered, "We made it home, buddy." Thanks to her. For the rest of the week, Grace haunted his thoughts. He couldn't shake the image of her standing there, calm and certain, offering him a piece of her peace. Every time he put Liam to bed, he thought of her. Every time he fixed a car at the shop, he caught himself looking toward the door, half expecting her to walk in. Then, one morning, a small white envelope arrived in his mailbox. No return address, just his name, handwritten neatly across the front. Ethan frowned. Turning it over, there was no stamp, no postmark. Someone must have dropped it off by hand. His heart began to race. He tore it open carefully, afraid to damage what might be inside. A small card slipped out, thick cream paper with faint gold edges. The handwriting was delicate, the kind that belonged to someone who still took time to write letters. He read it once, then again, then a third time. "When my daughter was 2 years old, a stranger gave me his first-class seat so I could feed her in peace. It changed how I saw the world. Today, I only return the favor. Keep spreading kindness whenever you can. Grace." The world went quiet. Ethan stood there, frozen, the card trembling in his calloused hand. His throat tightened, his vision blurred. Before he could stop it, a tear slipped down his cheek. He sat down slowly at the edge of his couch, Liam's toy truck under his foot, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. Grace's words weren't long, they weren't poetic, but they carried the weight of something eternal. She hadn't just given him a seat, she had given him a reminder that kindness, real kindness, never disappears. It only changes hands. He looked at the handwriting again, tracing the small, looping G of her name. There was something so human about it, so alive, that he felt like she was standing in front of him again. Ethan leaned back, exhaling shakily. He whispered into the empty room, "You didn't just give me a seat, Grace. You gave me hope." Liam began to fuss in his crib, small cries echoing through the apartment. Ethan walked over, picking him up gently. "You know, and Kit," he said softly, "there are people out there who do good without expecting anything back. People like her." The baby blinked up at him, his fever finally gone, his cheeks flushed with health. Ethan smiled faintly. "We're going to remember that, okay? We're going to live like that." He placed the card on the refrigerator door, pinning it under a small magnet shaped like a wrench. Every morning after that, he looked at it before heading to work. Every night, He looked again before tucking Liam in. It became more than a note. It became a promise. Weeks turned into months, but the memory of Grace Turner never dulled. Sometimes he'd catch a stranger's smile and think of her. Sometimes, on crowded flights, he'd glance at exhausted parents and remember the woman who once stood up without hesitation. Ethan reflects on gentle miracles, vows to care for his son, and remembers the power of kindness from Grace's memory. 2 years later, the world looked calmer, quieter, kinder, or maybe it was just Ethan who had changed. The storm that once surrounded him had settled into something steady. He was now 36, his hands no longer stained with oil, but with ink and blueprints. Life had shifted. He had gone from a mechanic to an engineer, from survival to stability. Yet, some memories refused to fade. Liam was now a bright, curious toddler, obsessed with airplanes. Every time a plane passed overhead, he would point and shout, "Up, Daddy, up." Ethan would laugh, lifting him toward the sky, always thinking of the woman who had made that word up mean something again. That afternoon, Ethan stood at Gate 17 of Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. His ticket read First Class, Seat 2A. It had been years since he'd sat there. The upgrade had come easily this time, a perk of his new job. Not a miracle. Still, as he held the ticket, he felt a flicker of the same old gratitude. He thought about Grace Turner. Her note was still pinned to his refrigerator, the edges worn, the ink slightly faded, but her message eternal. Keep spreading kindness whenever you can. The boarding announcement echoed through the terminal. Flight 692 to Los Angeles, now boarding first-class passengers. Ethan adjusted his jacket, ready to board, when a cry cut through the noise, a sharp, helpless wail that stopped him cold. He turned. Near the check-in line, a young mother struggled to soothe her baby. She was probably in her late 20s, dark curls spilling over her shoulders, one hand bouncing the infant while the other tried to wrangle a stroller that refused to fold. Her carry-on bag slipped from her shoulder, hitting the floor with a dull thud. The baby screamed louder. Passengers glanced, frowned, turned away. Some pretended not to see. Others whispered with that blend of annoyance and pity reserved for strangers in distress. Ethan felt his heart squeeze. The scene was achingly familiar. He walked toward her before he could second-guess himself. "Ma'am?" he said softly, not wanting to startle her. She looked up, eyes red-rimmed and tired. "Oh, hi. I'm sorry. I'm trying to—" "It's okay," Ethan said gently. "You're doing fine." Her baby wailed again, a shrill, desperate sound. She bounced the child, whispering, "Shh, shh, Mommy's here." Ethan hesitated for a moment, then smiled faintly. "I know this might sound strange," he said, "but I have a first-class seat on this flight. Would you and your baby like to take it?" She froze, blinking. "I'm sorry, what?" He nodded, his voice calm but certain. "You can have my seat. It's 2A. You'll have more space. And I think the baby could use some quiet—" The woman's mouth fell open slightly. "You're serious?" "Completely," he said. "Someone once did the same thing for me when my boy was sick. It changed everything. I've been waiting for the right moment to return the favor." Her lips trembled, the exhaustion on her face giving way to disbelief. "You don't even know me." Ethan smiled softly. "I don't have to. I just know how hard this part is." For a second, she said nothing. Then her eyes filled with tears. "My name's Olivia," she whispered. "Ethan," he replied, extending his hand. "Nice to meet you, Olivia." She shook it, gripping tighter than she meant to. "I can't take your seat." "Yes, you can," Ethan said kindly, "because someone once made sure I didn't have to say no either." The gate agent, overhearing the exchange, stepped closer. "Is there a problem, sir?" Ethan shook his head. "No problem. I'd just like to switch seats with her, if that's all right." The agent smiled faintly, recognizing the quiet significance of the gesture. "That's very kind of you." "Well, sir, I'll make the change." As Olivia gathered her things, still dazed, Ethan helped fold the stroller properly and handed her the carry-on bag. "You're good now," he said. "Just breathe. You and your little one are going to have a much better flight." She nodded, tears spilling freely now. "I don't even know how to thank you." Ethan glanced at the baby, who had stopped crying, now sucking calmly on a pacifier. "Just do something kind when it's your turn," he said with a small smile. "That'll be thanks enough." The boarding call repeated. Olivia stepped forward toward the gate, then turned back to look at him. Whoever did that for you, they must have been special. Ethan's chest tightened. She was, he said quietly, more than she'll ever know. She smiled through her tears. Well, you are too. He watched as she disappeared down the jet bridge, her baby resting against her shoulder. The sound of the infant's soft hiccups faded into the hum of the terminal. Ethan sat in a cramped seat, feeling complete as he recalled Grace Turner's kindness. With a purpose now, he smiled faintly at a compliment from a flight attendant and reflected on his journey. The camera lingers on Ethan's face as he gazes out the airplane window, sunlight spilling across his eyes. The world below glows like gold, silent and infinite. A soft voice narrates, "Sometimes the greatest miracles aren't born from wealth or power, but from a single act of compassion, one seat, one choice, one stranger's kindness that ripples through time. Because kindness costs nothing, yet it changes everything. The smallest gesture can rewrite a life, heal a heart, or remind the world that humanity still breathes." And in that moment, Ethan smiles, knowing the circle of kindness will never end. A single act of kindness can change everything. Ethan's story reminds us that compassion travels farther than we think. If this touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Hit like, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe for more real stories that restore faith in humanity.